Hey folks, this is Raekor, bringing you a guide to what is currently the most powerful Barbarian build in Reaper of Souls, the Raekor Barb. Now this video will showcase a lightning variant of the Raekor Barb. You can argue that the best variant is the fire variant, so I'll let you know the various options you can take, but I wanted this to be the spiritual successor to the Thunder God Barb, so that for those of you who followed that guide and still have all your lightning gear, this will be an easier transition. So first thing to note, what is a Raekor Barb? It's a barbarian that uses the Raekor set 5-piece bonus. This is critical to this build. Furious Charge gains the effect of every rune. That is the bare minimum that you need to get this build to work. Furious Charge is a powerful movement skill on a 10-second cooldown, and when you start adding in all the rune effects, it gets out of control. It's now dealing over 1000% damage with the fire rune, applies cooldown reduction for every enemy hit, which is going to be very critical to knowing how to position your shots, generates 10 additional fury, and you're going to see why we want to keep our fury near maximum, temporarily freezes enemies, and pulls in enemies as well. So while the set bonus applies all the runes, it is the rune that you have selected that will determine what element applies the damage. For our Lightning Barb, we're going with Dreadnought, but if you want the fire option, then go with Battering Ram. Ideally, Furious Charge will be your only attacking skill. However, for that to work, you need to reach certain cooldown reduction thresholds, as well as learn how to effectively optimize your charges. Until then, using a primary is not a bad idea. In this case, I've selected Weapon Throw, Mighty Throw, because it deals decent damage, plus it's really great as a barbarian to have a ranged attack. Sometimes when I'm taking too much damage, I like to be able to get out of the heat, but still fight back. Also, while this is actually one of the most powerful builds in the game, it suffers at single target DPS. Because that charge relies on attacking big groups, when you're fighting just one enemy, like a Rift Guardian, it does help to have some option to continue attacking. If you're going with fire, then Frenzy plus the Maniac rune is a solid choice. Each swing of Frenzy increases your attack speed, and with Maniac it also increases your damage. Now, if you want to be able to climb the higher Greater Rift leaderboards, then you're going to have to actually forego a primary skill, and instead take Ignore Pain. The Ignorance is Bliss rune allows you to rapidly regain life by spamming Battle Rage, which is actually going to be your only spender. You can also go with Ironhide, which increases the duration from 5 to 7 seconds. And as we'll explain later, the Pride of Cassius will increase that even more. However, for speed T6 farming, you don't really need Ignore Pain. In fact, if you really think you're hardcore enough to speed through T6 as fast as possible, you can even try using the Marathon Sprint rune. Next, we have Warcry Impunity. This generates 20 Fury, which is just enough to immediately cast Battle Rage, which you want to have active 100% of the time. The Impunity rune increases your all resistance by 20%, which is great considering you're going to have Warcry up 100% of the time. And it'll also help keep you near max Fury. Next, we have Battle Rage Bloodshed. Battle Rage is an indispensable barbarian skill. You have 2 minutes of 10% increased damage and 3% increased crit chance. The Bloodshed rune helps you clear packs even faster, but if you feel you can afford to lose that, you can go with Marauder's Rage instead, which slightly increases the damage bonus and will help a little more against single enemies. Our next two skills are selected to help deal with Rift Guardians and Champion and Elite packs. Like I said, our weakness is single enemies, so you want to bring out these skills for those fights. The first is Wrath of the Berserker. For 20 seconds you gain increased crit chance and attack speed, plus with the Insanity rune you deal 50% increased damage as well. This helps maximize every cast of your Furious Charge, which will have a few seconds of cooldown, since it won't be like when you're fighting packs of monsters and the cooldown refreshes instantly. The next skill is Call of the Ancients, The Council Rises. Now you may be wondering, why are we picking the Fire rune instead of together as one, the Lightning rune? Well, the Lightning rune is defensive, whereas the Fire rune increases the damage to 540% versus the 270 default. That's a 100% increase in damage. And I don't care how much plus lightning damage you've stacked, it's not going to add up to plus 100%. Again, we're using Call of the Ancients for pure burst damage to take down enemies, so the Council Rises wins. Now the best case scenario when you're fighting a Rift Guardian is having both of these skills off cooldown. First, activate Wrath of the Berserker, then Call of the Ancients, so that they benefit as well from the Wrath of the Berserker buffs. Onto our passives, the Boon of Bolcathos will help reduce the cooldown of Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients. The Berserker Rage passive has you dealing 25% additional damage while near maximum fury. And since this is a build that doesn't have any fury spenders, you'll be near max fury almost all the time. Rampage is a tremendous passive, and since this build excels at clearing packs quickly, you can have the full 25% increased strength almost all the time. The last passive is negotiable. I'm spec'd to speed clear Torment 6, really focused on taking down big packs and skipping stragglers. So the Brawler gives you a 20% damage buff as long as there are 3 enemies within 12 yards of you. And as you'll find out when we talk about cooldown reduction, you ideally only want to be charging packs of 3 or more enemies. But again, this build's weakness is versus single targets, so you can choose to instead take the Ruthless passive, which will help finish off those Rift Guardians faster. If you're climbing the Greater Rifts though, you might have to get a little bit more defensive, so Superstition will help out a lot in that regard. On to items. As previously mentioned, the bare minimum you need is the 5-piece Raekor set, or 4 pieces of Raekor with the Ring of Royal Grandeur. But an item that will really help you take this build to the next level is the Vile Ward Shoulders. Furious Charge deals more damage for every enemy hit while charging. Hit 3 enemies and you're dealing double damage. Ideal stats are Strength, Vitality, Furious Charge damage, and Cooldown reduction. A helm that really benefits this build is Leoric's Crown, because it almost doubles the effect of any gem you put in there. And what you want to put in there is a diamond. This will give you 25% cooldown reduction just from your helm slot. So the ideal stats there are Strength, Vitality, Crit Chance, and Socket. Once we're done with the gear, we'll explain why cooldown reduction is so important. For the amulet, as a melee character, the elemental immunity amulets are your best friend. The Zephyrian amulet is the ideal one, the one that makes you immune to all lightning damage, because Electrified is possibly the most difficult affix for a melee character to deal with. Ideal stats on your necklace are Elemental Damage, Crit Chance, Crit Damage, and Socket. The chest piece will be Raekor's Heart. Ideal stats, Strength, Vitality, 3 sockets, and Furious Charge damage. Or if you want to go more defensive for higher Greater Rifts, you can go with Reduced Damage versus Elites. Your gloves will be Raekor's Wraps. Ideal stats, Strength, Crit Chance, Crit Damage, and Cooldown reduction. For your bracers, if your focus is on speed clearing T6, then the Strong Arm bracers will be the best, because your Furious Charge will be applying a knockback effect, and the Strong Arm bracers deal 20 to 30% more damage to enemies who've been hit by knockback effects. But if instead you want to be clearing higher Greater Rifts, then you'll need the Ancient Parthen Defenders. As a secondary power, each stunned enemy within 25 yards reduces your damage taken by around 10%. Now, while none of the Furious Charge runes state that they apply a stun effect, it seems that the Cold rune's chill effect counts as a stun for purposes of activating the defenders. This translates into huge damage reduction when attacking big packs. Ideal bracer stats are Elemental Damage, Strength, Vitality, and Crit Chance. For your belt, if offense is more important to you, then the Witching Hour is always the best in slot. Ideal stats will be Strength, Vitality, Attack Speed, and Crit Damage. Now overall, attack speed isn't very beneficial to this build, particularly if you don't have a hatred generator, but the crit damage is too difficult to ignore for those pursuing raw killing power. But if instead Greater Rifts are your thing, then you need the Pride of Cassius, which increases the duration of Ignore Pain by 4 to 6 seconds. This effectively doubles the duration of Ignore Pain, and with good enough cooldown reduction, allows you to have a lot of uptime on the effect. Ideal Pride of Cassius stats are Strength, Vitality, All Resist, and Percent Life. For your ring, you'll need 1 Ring of Royal Grandeur with Strength, Attack Speed, Cooldown Reduction, and a Socket. Unfortunately, you have to take the attack speed there. I know I said attack speed doesn't really benefit this build, but you're only allowed to roll off 1 stat, and attack speed comes with the ring, so we have to take it. The other stat is a lot more useless. For the other ring, for solo play, you'll want a Unity, but only if you also have 1 on your follower, along with the follower item that makes them invulnerable. This effectively doubles your toughness. Ideal stats are Socket, Cooldown Reduction, Critical Hit Chance, and Elite Damage. By not having main stat on this ring, it becomes much more flexible, and you can share it across different characters. Main stat is also less important than those other attributes. 6% critical hit chance will do a lot more than main stat, as does 15% elite damage, and cooldown reduction means using Furious Charge more, keeping Ignore Pain up longer, and casting Call of the Ancients and Wrath of the Berserker more often. Now if you're in a group, you don't want to have the Unity Ring equipped. The ideal ring then becomes a Stone of Jordan. Ideal stats are Elemental Damage, Elite Damage, Cooldown Reduction, and a Socket. For your pants, you'll have Reeker's Breeches, ideal stats, Strength, Vitality, All Resist, and 2 sockets. For boots, you'll want Reeker's Striders, ideal stats, Strength, Vitality, All Resist, and Move Speed. And lastly, onto the weapon. Now, the single best weapon in this game for clearing higher greater rifts is the Furnace, simply because it deals up to 50% additional damage to elites. Ideal Furnace stats are Strength, a very high damage roll, a socket, cooldown reduction, and percent damage. If you don't have a Furnace, then the Maximus is a good choice for a fire build, because it adds percent fire damage. But if you're going to be a Thunder God, then you need Schaefer's Hammer. And in fact, it turns out that all around, Schaefer's Hammer is probably the next best thing to a Furnace for this build. Your lightning skills can deal up to 25% more damage, and you'll often have the proc up, which causes about 200% weapon damage to enemies around you every second. This will also help take down Rift Guardians. As for legendary gems, Bane of the Trapped is perhaps the best gem in the game across all classes and all builds, but only once you've unlocked its level 25 ability. It increases your weapon damage against enemies under control impairing effects by a significant margin, and at level 25, it's going to ensure that all enemies you're hitting are under this effect. A gem that'll really help with single target DPS is Mirene Teardrop of the Starweaver. Again, only once you've unlocked its level 25 ability. Basically, every 5 seconds, it'll automatically zap an enemy for a significant amount of damage. If you're speed clearing Torment 6, then the Bane of the Powerful buff can be kept up almost 100% of the time. Otherwise, what you might want to go with is the Gogok of Swiftness. This is especially important in the higher greater rifts, but once again, only if you have the level 25 unlock. The Gogok of Swiftness will increase your attack speed, which again isn't very useful to us, but at level 25 allows you to also gain cooldown reduction, which is very important to maintaining Ignore Pain, and to allow us to pop our big damage dealers more often. The Gogok of Swiftness can grant us up to 15% additional cooldown reduction. Now, a note on cooldown reduction: while more cooldown reduction will always help, there are a few breakpoints that are really important, and they're tied to how often your Furious Charge can refresh. Furious Charge has a 10-second cooldown, and that time is reduced by 2 seconds for every enemy hit. So we want to know what is the minimum number of enemies we have to hit at a given cooldown reduction in order to instantly reset Furious Charge. With no cooldown reduction, it's 5 enemies. That means when charging into big groups, you can repeatedly chain cast Furious Charge with no delay, for huge damage. If you reach a total cooldown reduction of 17.5%, then you can reset the cooldown on 4 enemies. If you hit 37.5%, then you can reset on 3 enemies. The next breakpoint is pretty tough to reach: 57.5% to reset on 2 enemies. If the Gogok of Swiftness will not get you to that 57.5%, then it's not worth using. Your total cooldown reduction is listed in your character sheet. You can't just simply add up all the cooldown reduction you have across your gear. It doesn't scale that way. For a refresher on how cooldown reduction stacks, check out this video here. Onto Paragon points. You want a total of 25% move speed, and then dump everything else into strength. For offense, max out cooldown reduction, then crit chance and crit damage are equally important. People say the rule of thumb is to keep a 10-to-1 ratio between the two. In other words, your total critical hit damage on your character sheet should be about 10 times your critical hit chance for optimum damage. Onto defense, max out all resist, then life and armor are arguably equally important. For utility, area damage is basically the only one that's going to really help you. Resource cost reduction does absolutely nothing for this build, and life on hit adds a tiny amount of healing. That wraps up this guide. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment letting me know what Barb build you run with. Check out these other videos, and until next time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.